Hello everybody. It's always a good day when you get to drive a Jag, and this is certainly no exception. In fact, I think what we have here could be one of the most special Jaguars ever made. This is a 2005 X350 generation Jaguar XJ Super V8 long wheelbase portfolio, and there's a good chance it's the best Jag you've never heard of. But why is that? Well, all this and more on today's exciting episode of JM on Cars. So then, what exactly is that we have here? Let's break it down. First off, the Jaguar bit. I think you all know that. So let's skip to the next part. X350. This is the fourth generation of the venerable flagship XJ saloon, which debuted many decades ago. Notably, the X350 was built under the stewardship of Ford, and with money from their new owners, they were able to build the car on an all-new aluminium platform, featuring a number of bondings and riveting, making this both stronger and lighter than the car it replaced, despite the fact it grew a fair bit in size. Though at a quick glance this car looks very much like the one it replaced, the X308 car, which could trace its roots back to the XJ40 of the mid-1980s, it is in fact very, very different. Notably, this car is quite a bit taller, and so it loses that impossibly low roofline that older Jaguars had. The upside was that it did gain a useful amount of interior space, though in short wheelbase guise, for a car that's 5 meters long, it's still not particularly generous for those in the back. There was also a fair amount of debate at the time from both those inside and outside Jaguar whether Ford have made the right decision by maintaining such a classic styling with their flagship car. They were concerned, and I think rightly so, that not only would a lot of people maybe fail to realise this was actually a new car, but that also it was almost certainly never going to attract new buyers to the brand. Because for those who felt like the old one was already a bit of a granddad car, this wasn't really going to fix anything. Nor indeed was the S-Type that had come out a few years earlier. And this may have been particularly upsetting to a few of Jaguar's engineers, because though it looked very traditional and conservative, it was in fact underneath just about the most radical car they'd built since the XJ220. It is certainly worth pointing out that even today, there aren't actually that many cars using as much aluminium in their construction as this did 20 years ago. Then, its only real rival would have been the Audi S8, which was built with similar materials, but in a different way, and the then new Mercedes-Benz S-Class, which also featured a fair bit of aluminium and was similarly weighty, about 1.8 tons. The BMW 7 Series, meanwhile, may have been a technological tour de force, but in terms of its construction, was far more ordinary, and as a result weighed a fair bit more. As did, for me, the one and only true rival for this car, the 5th generation Maserati Quattroporte, the car which I have a great fondness for, having previously owned one, and I've got to say, it's a wonderful thing, but you cannot deny the fact that glorious V8 and glamorous looks aside, it is a rather portly 2 tons. In other words, about 200 kilos more than the regular short wheelbase XJ. With the new platform came a variety of engines, most of which were familiar in some way, shape or form. So at the bottom of the range, you had a 3-litre Ford-derived V6, though with Jaguar-specific tuning, giving you 240 horsepower. Then at the top of the range, for the XJR, you have a 4.2-litre, uprated from the old 4-litre, supercharged V8, making 400 horsepower and about 400 pound-foot of torque. That's 540 newton meters. All of these cars came with a then new 6-speed automatic gearbox controlled by the traditional J-gate down here. It's got a sport and wet weather mode button, but in terms of manual control, there's not really much of it. You also got an all-new multi-link suspension all-round, complete with air suspension controlled by a system known as CATS. There is no sport button in here for it. It does what it thinks is right, given the moment. and to be honest, it actually generally does a fairly good job. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of the XJR, if for no other reason than that's generally the one that people think of when you mention XJ. That is the range-topping 4.2-litre supercharged V8 model. That was the sportiest in the lineup, and as far as most were concerned, the best XJ you could get your hands on. Not so many people, though, have heard of its sister, the Super V8, which came out at the same time and was the only model in the lineup more expensive than the R. It features exactly the same engine, making exactly the same power and torque. It probably didn't help that from the outside you would struggle to distinguish the two, and inside it was a very, very similar story. In essence, the Super V8 was basically a slightly more refined and luxurious XJR. Reports do conflict on this, but I do believe the one major mechanical difference was the fact that the Super V8 had a slightly more comfort-orientated suspension setup. However, what we are driving today is not the Super V8 as it was first launched. Instead, there are a couple of key differences about this particular car. First of which is the fact that this is a long wheelbase model. Jaguar introduced the long wheelbase option to the lineup in 2004, and as soon as they did, it became the default option for the Super V8, with short wheelbase remaining as a special order option. To create the long wheelbase car, Jaguar essentially added 5 inches behind the driver, fixing one of the common criticisms of it. In other words, there just wasn't that much space in the back for a car that was already fairly big, and here in long wheelbase guys is 5.2 meters long. So it's not small, but it is still noticeably shorter than say the long wheelbase 7 Series of the day or a Ford Crown Vic. The big deal here though is that this is a portfolio model, inspired apparently by the Concept 8 which had been shown at the New York Auto Show in 2003. This was a very limited edition car with between 250 and 258, depending on who you ask, being made exclusively for the export market. As far as I can tell, about 145 of them went to the United States, just 5 to Canada, those poor Canadians, and with about 50 going to Japan, I think 8 going to Australia, and the remaining cars being sent sort of elsewhere, but allegedly never ever here. Why exactly that was, I cannot say, but I can tell you that the portfolio is a very, very special car. First off, the thing you're most likely to notice is the fact it has some side vents, which became standard on the later facelifted version of this car, the X358, introduced in 2007, but did not exist on the regular X350 with the sole exception of these. It's also worth pointing out they are an entirely different design to those seen on the later cars and have a more sort of I suppose hand-finished look about them. They're still a production-made item, they're not that rough and ready, but there's just something a little bit skunkworks about them. They're functional too, and I gotta say, I love them. The cars were also available, I believe, in just one of 2 shades, the most popular being this cherry black. A stunning shade, a very, very deep item, but with a real red flake in it that on a nice, stormy, overcast British day like today, I'm not really going to be able to appreciate. You also have 20-inch Callisto wheels, which, unlike those fitted to other models that look the same, are forged, so they're even lighter. You also have a bigger bore exhaust tip at the back, though I think the rest of the system is fairly standard, and up the front you've got a mesh grille too. Another, I think, portfolio-specific item are these wing mirrors, which are chromed to match the wheels and the gills. Maybe that's one of the reasons they never sold them here. Chromed and polished stuff doesn't survive British weather all that well. This particular car, in case you're wondering, is a Japanese import, and it came over about 3 years ago, brought by a chap called Ian, who actually bought a pair, one to keep and one to sell. The one to sell has now gone, and he's not yet decided what he plans to do with this. Now, if he does want to sell it, I am tempted. In terms of options, this car doesn't actually have any, because the whole point of the portfolio was that they gave you all of them. So you have multi-zone climate control. You've also got in the back controls in the armrest for the stereo, and also to move the passenger seat forward and backwards to give you even more room. I've also just noticed that for extra JDM fan brownie points, the car still has its original roadside flare. The car also has the never quite cutting edge and now horribly dated infotainment system that all of these XJs I think got, which gives you controls of your climate, your audio, your nav, that sort of stuff. Naturally, the windows are electric all round. They are also double glazed, but sadly not with soft close. There is also a sunroof, and viewers of the channel will know I am a big fan of those. But the USP of the portfolio were the materials on offer, because you had Connolly leather in a shade called Conker. When I originally read the specification sheet and it said the car has Conker leather, I must admit I was a little bit confused. I wondered how you got to hide off a Conker, and I thought it might be all spiky, but no, it's Conker colour. On camera, it may look sort of subtly grey, which is because it is subtly grey with a brown tint to it. I like it a lot. You also have these deep pile lambswool carpets and this American black walnut burr, which I have to say I really like. Keeping those in the back busy, you've also got fully independent entertainment systems consisting of a screen in each of the front seats, which can be controlled via inputs in the middle of the back. And when they want to have a bit of a kip, the seats will even recline too. The boot is a slightly odd shape and not as generous as some others, but I think more than adequate for most uses. When you're out and about, driving normally, as I am now, it's a thoroughly pleasant car. The engine is simply a distant rumble, you barely even notice its presence. The gearbox is doing its job admirably. The car has just been through the workshop at Swallows Racing and it's had a number of things done to it, including a minor lowering of the suspension, so it just looks that little better. Although I have to say, the car being long wheelbase, it actually has, to my eyes, slightly better proportions than the regular one anyway. It's also had a general refresh of all the components that needed it, and the obligatory smaller supercharger pulley and uprated air intake. Meaning that once you have dropped the kids off at school and you need to get back to the office in a hurry, it should still be able to do that other Jaguar thing. So, can it? Well, let's put the box in sport mode and find out. Oh, this is wonderful. It's such a dignified way to be in a hurry. It really is. I love it. The steering is a little light. The extended wheelbase makes the car very stable, but also a little less keen to turn in than, say, the regular car. In fairness, though, I would say of all of the sporty saloons, the XJR was always the one that felt maybe closest to the regular car. It felt just like an XJ with a spicier engine. That being said, in defence of the regular XJ, it was also the one that in basic trim felt the sportiest, whereas say your regular 730D never really had that much interest in going around a bend. This is good. As you can probably tell, the moment I got into this car, it started raining, so the roads are ever so slightly greasy. One of the issues with these cars is that they have lots of power, lots of torque, an automatic gearbox, and no limited slip differential, so on occasion they can be a little bit lively at the back. That being said, I haven't had any issues thus far, and I was expecting some. It's sized really well for these roads too. Visibility is generally pretty good. Straight ahead is decent, as is here, although your B-pillar is just a little further forward than I would like, but making up for that is the fact that because of the long wheelbase bit and the extra long door, your sort of left 3/4, your passenger side 3/4 visibility is excellent. Annoyingly, this being a car with a J-gate, there isn't actually a way to tell it what gear you want. All you can do is restrict exactly how high up the range it can go. So let's tell it can't go more than second, and yeah. It's geared quite long, I think, this thing. Problem is, I also don't know whether it's actually in second, third, fourth, or whatever. In any case, though the gearbox is a slight frustration, the engine is not. It's a masterpiece. In spite of the upgraded air filter, unlike some other Jags I've driven with this engine, the supercharger noise is not all that prominent. You can hear it, and I quite like it, but it's certainly far from intrusive, and even really when you've got your foot absolutely welded, it's not really all that shouty at all. Allow me to demonstrate. Does go though, it really does. It's not sort of chuck you in the back of the seat performance, but what you have is just effortless, unending power. It responds nicely and it pulls all the way to the, okay, fairly low 6,000 RPM red line. It's got what I'd say is just the right amount of power for a car like this. It never feels unwieldy, it never feels like there's too much engine for the chassis. It's all in balance. If anything, I'd say the real letdown here is the steering, which is just a little bit woollier than in some other Jags. However, the suspension, when you're up to speed, still does a fairly decent job, in spite of the relatively low profile tyres, the lowered, sporty-ish suspension. It's not uncomfortable. Around town it does struggle. The air suspension in this era of cars never seemed to be quite right. But here it's probably as right as it ever was, if that makes sense. Brakes decent too, nice and responsive, but not overly servo. Turning circle, not a speciality. The long wheelbase does not help there. Adds just over a foot to it. And truth be told, other than that being KMs and this unusual gadget here that I cannot identify. Is this a toll tag? What is this? It's made beeps and spoken Japanese to me, but I don't understand. So if someone knows what that is, can you please tell me? But other than that, you wouldn't really know that this was an import. And I have to say, I do get why you would want to bring one of these over, because it's magnificent. Sure, for this money you could get yourself into a facelift X358 XJR, or if you felt that way inclined, you could also get the last of line, the X351, the sort of a swoopier shape XJ, the 5th gen. This model also has an interesting place in history because it is an example of the Super V8 portfolio that was the final vehicle to roll off the line at the old Browns Lane factory before production moved over to the new plant at Castle Bromwich, where they had been building cars for quite a while already, but Browns Lane was the historic home of Jaguar and had been for some time, and so that was a momentous occasion. This does mean that if ever you want to see what exactly one of these looks like for yourself, you can do so easily, because that exact car is currently in the British Motor Museum, alongside a whole host of other really cool stuff. So if you're into your cars, British or otherwise, I'd suggest you check it out. I had a good look around there when Auto Alex had his Shed Fest, and it's a fantastic day out, I've got to say. I'm also very smitten with this car. It's not overburdened with tech in here. In fact, compared to an S-Class or a 7 Series of the day, it's really quite basic. I can't really think of many a gimmick to tell you about that'll make you go, ooh, but I think it looks cool. These have grown into their looks for me. I didn't like them when they came out. I told my dad not to buy one. He got an S-Type instead. I've never lived it down. However, they're so cool. This one, okay, is a little bit blingier than most, but again, people generally wouldn't know that it's anything other than your average, ordinary Jag. Most, I think, might mistake it for an X-Type, and I don't actually mind that, because those who know will still know, and you'll know that this is a very cool car. Even better than that, because they're so weird and rare and people just don't know what they are, they're quite good value. I'm told that on the continent, one of these could easily go for over £25,000, but here, for whatever reason, you can get one for about 15 to 20. And so for me, the Jaguar XJ Super V8 portfolio gets a real thumbs up. I like this. I have to say, researching this car was a bit of a mission, because not only is the portfolio a very rare car, but even the Super V8 is difficult to get facts on, and when you do find them, they'll often contradict with the others that you've already found. One thing that was of particular interest is that after this car was produced, so I think from about 2006 onwards, they ditched the Super V8 name and instead used around the world either Vanden Plas, which in the States apparently had been the trim used for posh Jags decades after we'd stopped with it. Then it was replaced with the Daimler Super 8 that we also didn't really use here. We'd kind of given up on the Daimler brand in Britain a number of years ago, so it's all a bit strange, really. I think if you want really of this era the best driving super saloon, that has to be the Quattroporte. If you want the most luxurious, that's going to be the S-Class, and if you want the one with all the tech, that's the 7 Series. But as balances go, the XJ is pretty hard to beat.